All right, y'all. So you're being recorded by three different programs apparently, and welcome. And the Jen is a member of our roundtable. She is a clinical psychologist. She's in Arizona, and the town is
Scottsdale.
Scottsdale, right out. That's part of Phoenix or outside of Phoenix, right? Close to it.
Yeah.
Okay.
Adjacent.
And yeah, and she does clinical. She does sports psychology. She does political psychology. She does basket weave. No, she does lots of different expertises because she's very bright and very good at what she does. And so she is here today. One of her areas of expertise is financial psychology, which I find fascinating. Like your relationship with money, um, money being one of the four major sources of happiness in life, I think is very important. So, without further ado, Dr. Jen Serlin.
Well, good morning, all. And our previous discussion could not have set this talk up better with just everything that everyone was touching on. And, Charles, to your point that success tends to be defined as how much money is in your bank account rather than other variables is incredibly telling. And another piece of what I do is also positive psychology. And so, it's all about well-being and getting from good enough to great. And that's a lot of also where the relationship with money comes in. And so this talk today and thinking about who you all are, where you're all at in your lives, it's a combination of those two things. And so before I get into some of the nuts and bolts of what we know about actual money, spending, and well-being, I wanted to talk more about some of that deeper financial psychology stuff, which is really about our personal relationship with money and what money means to us. And given the size of this group, I also, please feel free to chime in um, if something resonates or whatever you're thinking. So, understanding a little bit of how we each got to now, because we are products of our environment, I wanted to start talking about the history of money and just even the idea of what is money and what does money mean to each of us as individuals. I don't know if anyone has any thoughts on this, but
it's a way to or it's a means to have access to things that I need and want, if that makes sense.
absolutely, right? It's it's a secondary need that we use to pay for our primary needs. And at the end of the day, it's an accounting system. It's a way for societies to keep track of who owns what, who owes what, but it doesn't necessarily explain sort of why money is so important. I mean, it buys us these things, but why is this all so valuable? And one of the most important things when it comes to money is that objectively, it's not real. Like coins, dollars, they don't have any inherent value. They only have value because we agreed that they have value, that we have faith in this system. And so, I now think of cryptocurrency. I cannot tell you what that is really, in spite of it being explained to me many times, but it's money. And we have collectively decided, okay, this is a form of currency. So we just accept it and we go on faith. And so that's where I really want to go to this origin story of money, which is it came from religion. So our first recorded, I guess, data on, money being exchanged comes from Mesopotamia about 5,000 years ago. The town of Uruk, which was essentially the New York City of its day, it was this major hub. And in that era of time, everything centered around the temple, or whatever you want to call it. It tended to be that. And at that time, there was no separation between what we now call church and state. So the center of power was all within the temple. And historically, wealth had been measured by how many physical things you had. So land, cattle, crops, whatever it was. But as cities grew and these temple centers grew stronger, that got really complicated to keep track of. And so money was developed by religion to an extent so that the temple could measure, who was paying taxes, who owed what, and what was going out and to whom. And so with that, part of what happened is that implicitly from the get-go, money was tied to being in God's favor. And people who had more money were blessed, which is a language that we still use now. And so why I think this is so important is that it kind of infused throughout our culture. And so as time went on, this was only reinforced stronger and stronger. So if we look at, the Renaissance period in Western Europe, and again, royalty were blessed by the gods, chosen by the gods. And of course, they needed a lot of money to show because that was tied to power. So this is our origin story. And then we go to the founding of America. And so you have John Calvin, who, right, Calvinism, which is Protestantism, which the Puritans, and he talked about that people had money because God wanted them to have money. So Adam Smith, to an extent, secularized that idea, the father of capitalism, the wealth of nations. And he argued that people working for their own ends were, in fact, doing the bidding of divine providence. And so our the foundation of our society is still really tied into the more you have, the more you are favored. And this plays out in our current system in so many ways. So well, it's been a while since my oldest daughter's in Korea, so I've gone to visit her a couple of times this summer. So doing a lot of international travel. And, you get on an airplane and, okay, so the people who are in first class who have the most money, well, of course, they get to board first. They're sequestered off and they have this incredibly lovely setup. There's a couple of bathrooms for just a few of them, and someone is waiting on them. And then you board based essentially on how much money you have and how much you're willing to pay. And we kind of accept this as it's just how it is. And we tend to use the language in this society, which I always bristle at, but the idea that people deserve that based on how much money they have. And I'm not passing a value judgment on it, but it's that thing that we need to be aware of this origin story and how it plays out because it absolutely plays out for us in our individual life. One other example is, I don't know, I think most of you are on the East Coast, but in Southern California, you have, and the freeways there are notoriously rough traffic, but you have in certain areas these fast track lanes that you pay for. And so if you have more money, like your time is more valuable, you should be able to get places faster. Is this underlying assumption? And it's just worth pausing because this absolutely, again, shapes our own relationship with money and how it plays out. And this language, and I, work with a lot of like high net worth people, and it plays out in their own lives. And so, I was talking with someone, they were coming into an investment agreement, and the amount that everyone was invested was agreed upon. But this person said to me, well, I'm only worth 15 million. And, he has 150, so he's worth more. Which to me was, whoa, 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 slow this down. He's got more money in his bank account, but no one is worth any more than you are. But we have been conditioned to think that way. And so knowing these influences is really important for us to really make meaningful change. We can't change what we don't know. So then let's go down to the level of the family, because every family, if we think about other aspects of family, every family has its own culture, right? Its own ways of being. For those of you who are coupled, it's right, you get together with someone and suddenly things that were just like, well, no, that's how everyone does things. You realize, oh, maybe not. That's just my family. Well, every family has its own culture around money, but we don't really talk about it, or at least not in really productive ways. And so every year, the American Psychological Association does a study on, what are the biggest stressors in America? Amongst couples, what are the biggest things they fight about? Money. And a lot of that, it feels like you're fighting about, where do we spend? Do we pay for the kids' college? To what extent? Do we buy this car? And you get kind of stuck in the weeds, because really part of what's being played out is that bigger family history. So anyone who I work with, we draw out a family map and we talk about messages around money, financing, spending, and creating that awareness of how it plays out for ourselves. And so, thinking of my own family, there's so many interesting stories. But one of them, my grandfather, who was a well-off and a wealthy individual. When my father was a kid, my grandfather was a very interesting guy in so many respects. But he would give my dad a quarter for allowance and make him account for every penny. He would have to come back, sometimes with receipts, and tell him exactly how he spent it. Not so healthy. But so my dad, who did not want to be that person, with his own children, he's generous. But with himself, and my dad is now 78 years old, I hope he still counts his quarters. So, and I should preface this with, my dad is a physician. He just retired last year. So he's doing just fine financially. But he's a Prius devotee. And so I can tell you he's the only doctor with the car in the doctor's parking lot that's a Prius. If you think about that culture and who docs often tend to be. But the last time he went to buy a new car, he picked out the lowest end model. Now, my mom, who's not, some big spender, but, she came in and she was like, no. She said, all right, I'm all right, fine, drive your Prius, but you're at least getting the highest end model. But it's at this stage in his life, he really is still counting those quarters. He's still accounting. Um, so it's interesting. So we need to know how that plays out for ourselves, how that comes into our relationships, and then we get down to ourselves as individuals. And really, what does money mean to us? What is our relationship with it? How much is enough? And what is a healthier relationship for us? And so getting to that point where our relationship with it is as clean as can be, but we really do need to know these origin stories, and that we don't base our personal value, our worth on what our bank account looks like. Okay, so with that backdrop, I now want to get a bit more into, what does the science tell us about spending and well-being, and how we can spend to best boost our happiness and those for our family and those around us. And Doc, I sent you a slide. I don't know if you can throw that up now.
You sent me a slide. You are assuming way too much about my technology skills.
I
This,
Well,
this
I sent it to you because with my technology skills, I'm not sure about sharing my screen. So
uh, I am completely.
I think you can share from within the application. So that down at the bottom there's a share.
Here, but
Yeah.
I just access to my email address. Is that what you sent it by email?
that's where I sent it.
How the heck do I get there?
Oh Lord. Do you have the do you have it pulled up, Jen?
Where is it? I do.
Yeah. Pulled up, hit share at the
Yeah,
bottom.
hit share at the bottom.
Okay. Wow.
Thank you, Charles.
You'll
Mhm.
notice amongst the many things I do, none of it is related to technology.
It's okay.
Oh, wait, there it is. Oh my gosh. That's really
Yeah.
exciting. Okay. Well, thank you all. So, want to talk about these 5 fundamental ways that we can spend that really does enhance our well-being and a little bit about the research that gets us there. And before I dive into that, do want to talk about, and the study of money and well-being is an evolving field, and so we're always getting new data. But one of the things that really does seem to come out is that after around that 75 to $100,000 mark, you get diminishing returns. That below that point, there's more of a struggle. There's less room for spending for well-being, that there's a lot more stress around money. But after that point, it is diminishing returns. Generally speaking, what is interesting is, and Charles, to what you were talking about earlier, your experience in Monaco, is that for the people who are already unhappy and just kind of, yeah, not so happy folks, doesn't matter how much they have. If you're unhappy before, you're going to be happy. But for the people who tend to be happy people and invest in their well-being already, for those people, more money will lead to more happiness. And my guess is a lot is about how they spend it. So the first thing that's incredibly important is that idea of investing in experiences, not things. So Martin, I love that you're going to go to the Sphere and have the experience of seeing the Eagles.
Right.
But so
Hey, Jen, I read something just recently that got my attention that said money doesn't change people. It just amplifies what was already there. Do you agree with that or not?
I do tend to. Yeah. I mean, and I do, I guess in that theme, I am generally more of a power reveals rather than corrupts.
Oh.
And
That is a big debate between me and I shared that with Doc as well. That's a big debate between me and a few of my friends.
oh, okay. Interesting. And I mean, I think, and as I talked about, power and money have been infused from the get-go. So I think it's a similar process. Um, but so why don't things bring us happiness? And this is tied to what we call hedonic adaptation. So if we think of us as people, we are remarkably adaptable. So we can adapt to incredible hardship. I was reading recently about people's capacity to adapt to living in wartime. And while it is initially devastating and a huge shock, we adapt remarkably fast and pretty well, which I didn't expect. But so it's great, it's very protective. But the flip side of that is to things that are good in our lives, we also adapt really quickly too. And they no longer bring us joy. So, Doc, you're a car guy. So I think of that experience, and I'm sure we all have had it where, there's a car we want. And we have various degrees of knowledge and excitement about whatever the car might be. But generally speaking, we want this car, we're excited about it, and we get it. And for a while, it does bring us happiness. We get in the car and we enjoy those bells and whistles, and it's great. But after maybe 6 months or so, it becomes a car and a way to get places. And it no longer brings us joy in the same way. And what do you bet? There's a better, faster, more interesting model that's already out. And so it ups the ante. And so we just don't get really that happiness return on our investment versus when we invest in experiences, we carry those with us forever. And we also get the joy of anticipation, right? So, Martin, I'm going to run with, thinking about the concert. Like you threw it out there. There's been the planning, there's an excitement around it. So then you have the experience itself, which is really enjoyable. And then you have the memory of it. And that continues to bring us joy. So always go with those experiences over things. Then helping others instead of yourself. This is a big one. And when we, if you put people in an fMRI machine and you even just have them imagine donating money, the reward centers of their brain lights up. It brings us pleasure. And when just in positive psychology in general, the single biggest sort of mood boost you can do for yourself is an act of kindness for someone else. And so when you take care of someone else, when you donate, when you help someone else out, you get a boost right there for your own well-being. And so there's so many different studies on this, but one of them that I like that's been replicated a number of times is they gave people either $5 or $20 and a bunch of people, and they gave them a mood assessment at the beginning of the day, and they had the instruction of either spend on yourself or spend on someone else. Send them out into the world. They could do whatever they wanted. They could donate it. They could buy themselves a cup of coffee. They could do the thing where they pay it forward. They buy the person behind them, whatever it was. At the end of the day, they touch base with them and, amongst other things, assess their happiness.
Jen,
Across, yes.
question. Sorry to interrupt again.
Oh, no,
Um,
I'm,
it's given me a tad of heartburn when it says help others instead of yourself. Does that mean you should prioritize others' needs ahead of your own?
you know, and I should maybe fix that language. It means honor both, but it means if you want that boost of well-being, that it often is you're going to get more bang for your buck putting others first to an extent, which of course does not mean deny yourself. Like that gets into a whole realm of pathology. But to just know, you know, you treat yourself and it's just kind of part of your day, you're not necessarily going to get the same happiness boost that you might from helping someone else.
But okay, so here's this. This is my problem with servant leadership, for instance. If you're always, to me, your primary responsibility is to take care of yourself and your family. And if you don't make that the number one priority, if you're taking care of everybody else and their families, then I would say, uh, who's responsible for taking care of you and your family then? Are they? That's the
A
my
hundred percent. And
my whole stick is about balance, and so I think we're in a violent agreement. But I can't, in good conscience, coach people and tell them put everybody else's needs first.
100% no. And I'm gonna shift that word instead. Um, but it is knowing that when it does come to your well-being, and again, it's based on the assumption that you are in fact taking care of yourself and your own loved ones, that you're just not going to derive sort of that same happiness boost. Um, and an interesting piece about this, when we think about money, so if I take half of you and I say, okay, think about what you had for breakfast this morning. And I take the other half and I say, just think about money, not about your bank accounts, but just think about money. And then I say, hey, I'm raising money for my favorite animal sanctuary, best friends, Kanab, Utah. Love them, but they're all good. And then I ask you, hey, will you give me a donation? Being primed to think about money, people become less generous. They give less. It just changes how we think, which is interesting given that when you have people think about giving people money, they actually get a boost. But if you have that moment, pause, think about it, there's a little bit more of that hoarding. So, Jeff.
I
Right.
wonder if I wonder if people think about giving money to someone, they picture an individual in need or a person that's personalized, it's a face. And if they just write a check to a charity, that's impersonal and it just doesn't do the same thing. It's like for the same reason that someone will cut you off in traffic, but they would not step in front of you in a grocery store line because you have that anonymity layer that depersonalizes.
Mm-hmm. It, I don't know the data on the differentiation between giving to a person versus a cause that more generic. But I do know that even that giving to a cause, you do get a boost.
Sure.
Yeah, I'll have to look into that.
I think that's a great point, Jeff. I mean, from my personal experience, that if I can help someone, I've even joined into this obscene tipping culture we've gotten into. At first, I resisted it, and then I thought, geez, I've got plenty of money. I can give this bartender, he gave me a Diet Coke, and I can give him a $5 tip, and that makes his day better, and I won't even miss it. I've changed my whole mindset around that in terms of what Jen's talking about. I mean, it's a guy I used to work with said, "Well, you'll never go broke tipping." I guess it would be hard, but if you know what I mean, it's just a simple act of kindness that it didn't really hurt me and made his day better. That's this. But Jen, we're actually at the end of time, but if you guys are okay with it, I'd like to extend the time so that Jen can have some more time to do. Are you guys all right with that? Is we got
Yeah.
a small, okay. Well, let's go let's say another 15 minutes, Jen,
Okay.
if because at least I'm getting a lot out of this, so I would love to hear you continue.
And I'm sorry for being off camera, but I'm in a low a low site in the cabins in a cabin in the woods. So I did have a question. Jen, as you're talking about, what the currency trades for and how it's valued and how we try to create the right value, I keep on thinking of the word approval. And I think of it as even in these virtuous uses of our money, it seems that I can't help but think that really I'm just seeking approval of others, and 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 people yield their approval to people who are rich, in a manner. And I think we all get that, and then this money kind of just becomes a way for seeking approval. And so I only throw that out because only a psychologist could make any sense out of what I just said.
Oh my goodness. And Mac, I'm so glad you're here. And that point about approval is so interesting. And a little bit of a stretch, but I feel like part of what you're tapping into is right. I mean, so if we go back to the idea of like being blessed and that you're favored, um, but the halo effect is something that is where, and it comes out a lot when people have more money, is we just assume that they are smarter, more capable, that they know more, we defer to them. And it is, it's almost like whatever they do, we just assume, well, they must know what they're doing because they're really wealthy. And it's just this interesting relationship. And I mean, we need to slow that down, because there's no relationship. I had the experience early in my career of working with, again, someone really high net worth. And I was maybe 30 years old. And I remember sitting there because I didn't realize that how much I bought into that and how much I had this assumption. And we were talking, and I realized, like, oh my goodness, okay, obviously this person knows things about making money in business that I do not know. And I still don't know. But, if we took an IQ test, I would have won pretty handily. And it was really valuable information for me and helped break that halo effect, but then also that notion of seeking approval. And in some ways, also, so we've got that big meta level, but I would also go back to our family of origins and the role of money and what we've been taught and the meaning of it, and what your value is. So the same grandfather who gave my dad the quarter, When I was in graduate school, he said, what are you doing? And I said, oh, I'm in graduate, I'm becoming a psychologist. And he said, Jennifer, you need to do something that helps people, like Mr. Firestone, who created a tire that got people places and made a lot of money doing it. And I was like, well, Grandpa, psychology is all about helping people. But I didn't have his approval because I wasn't doing something that was going to help people and make a lot of money. And so it just gets all very messy. Mac, I don't know
Well,
if that spoke to
Jen, when Charles and I were having lunch, we were talking about just how much is enough, and because to me, and how to be happy, yada yada yada. And I just said, if somebody says, "Is Charles Weems successful?" You know what they're talking about. They're talking about his bank account. They're not talking about his values. They're not talking about whether he's contributing to his community, whether he's a good dad and husband and that sort of thing. But that's a cultural thing.
Mhm.
That's in our culture, especially for men. When you say, "Is he successful?" We're talking about somebody's bank account, and that's cultural.
Absolutely. Well, and I'll get back to the buy yourself time, but since you brought up the social comparison factor, it is always there and we all do it. People like to think,
I am not feeling good enough now that Charles went up to me with the Monaco thing.
uh,
I said I thought I was pretty successful being down here at the beach, but now that he's been to Monaco, I'm feeling bad about myself. Jen, help me, please.
100%. I mean, it really does work that way. And people really do like to think that they're immune to it, and no one is. It's like advertising. We're all vulnerable to it, but if we know it, we can work to thwart it. And it's natural. We look up and there will always be people who have more money than us. I, again, worked with someone who talked about, and I mean, they heard themselves, they knew what they were saying, but growing up, their family had a private plane, but the circle they ran with, the other families had private jets. And so their family got there late, later than the other ones. And it was a memory that stuck with her. It was almost kind of a little bit of a shame-based thing, like, oh, we're just here from our plane. So it is all relative, and we just really have to be mindful of it. And that's where we get back to those things that don't bring us joy. And, and going back, I guess, Stephen, the biblical, there's a lot in the Ten Commandments of do not covet thy neighbors. It's natural, but we have to know it so that we can fight it because it will not bring us happiness, right? It's you get something and you want something more.
Well, the tough thing about quoting scripture is right after that, they say you're our chosen. Now go wipe out the others and just take it. So you're not allowed to covet, but you're allowed to take, and it gets weird.
A lot of mixed messages, right? I mean, if we go back to sort of that Renaissance period where that's kind of really that origin of almost a formalized greed is good message. It did not start with Gordon Gekko, certainly. Um, but they were preaching to people penury. There's nobility in being poor, but you need to give us your money because we value it and we're closer to God.
But
It's complicated stuff. And that's part of why I really wanted to lay out that history before we got into these how-tos, because the how-tos are kind of like, when we go to physical therapy, I'm guessing we've all been there given our stages of life. I've spent a lot more time there than I wish I did. But if they just tell you, do these exercises, okay, you do them, which is this information, and yeah, you get better. But if you understand, okay, here's why I'm doing it, here's what it impacts, here's your specific injury, and here's how you're helping it, you're going to be a lot more compliant. You're going to be a lot more efficient with doing your exercise, and you're going to get better benefits and do it longer. So I think knowing all of those things and what they play into with this. And so wanting to touch on that idea of buying yourself time. That when we use our funds to buy ourselves time to do other things. So one, we get ourselves out of doing things that are tasks. And as we were talking about at the beginning of the last call, that Americans do tend to be in a state of time poverty, that we do feel we're doing too much and things are constant. And, there's always an email, you can always be on. And so really important to be like, okay, if I spend my money in ways that buys me time, I get a sense of relief. But we find that when people do that, they tend to then invest their time in ways that serve their well-being. So more often than not, people will use that extra time to spend time with family, friends, loved ones. And we know that the single biggest contributor to our well-being, just from positive psychology, nothing related to money, is relationships. And so, yeah, do the thing where when we got back from visiting Isabel in Asia, that first week back, we decided, you know what, we're going to do one of those meal services and just have ready-made meals delivered because we knew we were going to have a lot of catching up to do, certainly work-wise, but also with people in our lives. And that, yeah, we were going to spend more than we typically would on meals, particularly after coming off a big trip, but it bought us time. And so, then I was able to go see my parents and, go take a walk with a friend. That is always going to be well worth it and contribute to well-being. And so then that last one is if we spend on many small pleasures instead of a few big ones, we get more bang for our buck, generally speaking. So this ties in again with that hedonic adaptation. Those big things that we really want, diminishing returns. But if we sort of do those little small ones, I don't know if anyone watched Parks and Rec, but they would do treat yourself. And, they would kind of go all in on it. But, I don't necessarily go buy myself a expensive coffee drink every day, but there are periods of time when I'm like, I'm gonna go treat myself. And I get a benefit from that. And it's kind of like eating dessert. That first bite is really good. And the second bite is pretty good. But by the time I get to the 10th bite, I don't know about you all, but I'm not getting the same pleasure from it. But we kind of are like, well, this is really good and I paid for it, so I'm going to keep doing it. And so this is like that. And so it's that, okay, enjoy those first two bites, and that's good enough because we tend to get often more pleasure, more happiness from the frequency sometimes rather than the intensity of things, but our minds overvalue the intensity. Yeah. And so at the end of the day, it really is about spending in ways. I've got it down there. I don't need to read it to you, but it's, in spite of all those messages about, money meaning that you're blessed, you're favored, that you have approval, all of those things, it's really about how we spend and just knowing that that's what has the biggest impact. And when we count our blessings, it's usually not the financial ones necessarily. It's the people in our lives. And so really slowing it down and using that knowledge to spend in ways that really best serves you.
Yeah, Jen, part of our lunch, Charles and I were talking about, was saying sometimes well, there's data to show this, but poor people are often happier than the uber wealthy. And I think the reason is, once you're uber wealthy and insulated, you don't need anybody and you tend to get somewhat isolated, especially spend a lot of time preserving your wealth. But poor people need each other to get their basic needs met. They enjoy each other. They need those relationships. And Martin, even when I looking at bands, as a, this I'm getting wildly creative here. Like the Beatles, the best-selling band of all time, we're only together for 7 years. They all got rich and they didn't need each other anymore. It's like, and so Jen, I hope I'm dovetailing with what you're saying about balance and caring relationships been one of the major sources of happiness. Uh, it's meeting other people, enjoying those relationships is so important, and money can't buy that, right?
No. Well, and Doc, just 100%, and speaking to the isolation that can come with money is, right, that lack of trust, and it absolutely disrupts relationships. I worked with someone who, I mean, any date this person would go on, he would have the person sign an NDA. I mean, so not healthy. And I mean, one of the, and I'm sure this comes through. I take great care, that anyone I talk about, there's no way you can trace. I take confidentiality really seriously. But one of the wealthiest people I ever worked with, I think for at least a couple months, every time this person came into my office, he would say, "You must be thinking, why am I here? He has everything. How could he be unhappy?" And every time I would say, "No, I'm not thinking that at all." I mean, but it was this absolute projection on his part of, "I'm so wealthy. How can I not feel good?" Because there's not a relationship between the two once you've hit that 75, $100,000 number and your needs are well taken care of. But we really, as much as we know it, we don't know it.
Well, my last comment, I hope I'm not hijacking your presentation here, but I do believe that culturally, the American marketing machine is very specifically designed to keep us feeling not good enough and like we don't have enough. And you need to buy, but if you bought our stuff, you would. So we're getting a lot of external noise telling us we need more all the time. That's really inaccurate. That's part of the struggle, I think. So, well, we are out of time, and if do you guys have questions? Or are you okay? I mean, it seems to be just us chickens. Um,
No,
I
I was
just I just feel bad because I just found out that it was inappropriate to have my date sign an NDA. I've traditionally had them sign both an NDA and a waiver, and so I
Mac,
guess
I wasn't naming names.
okay, okay,
yeah, Mike, we were trying to keep confidentiality here.
yeah.
Jeez.
Hmm.
Now, what I was gonna say is back earlier when you were talking about, I guess, understanding your personal relationship to money. It really didn't rear its head until I was engaged to be married, and my wife and I we were trying to have a discussion about the wedding. We were more than a year out, but just coming up with like a budget and stuff like that, and it did not go well. So from that, we decided,
But
well, let's do financial
Tanya's
care.
a financial like expert, though, right? I mean, that's her
Yeah,
area.
she's in finance. But well, we did financial counseling, right? And so being in there, like we totally look at it like total money, totally different, like on the opposite sides of the spectrum. And so well, we got a book, and it helped to shape where we can meet kind of in the middle of where we both were. And from that, like we've been married 8 years. I can think of maybe twice where we've had like pretty heated debate, but other than that, we're on the same page. So I'm saying all of that to say I really learned a lot about how my relationship with money was shaped by how I was brought up and what I was exposed to and my view of what success was and how money should be spent and all of that stuff. And so it just helped to kind of steer me in a direction to be more aware of my relationship to money.
It, right? It's so powerful when, at least I find when we really slow that down and really look at it, because, that traditional economic view that it's dollars and cents and that we're objective, rational beings, it's numbers. Well, no, it's not. Uh,
It took me the longest to really sit down and really do a budget. Because I was getting more in my own way at that, and I even told my financial planner that I hadn't started working with yet. We actually kind of got into it the first time because he told me I need to be on a budget, and I was like, "For what? Do you see how much money I make? I don't need to be on a budget, And so it yeah, I've learned a lot.
it's so interesting. It didn't end up working out for a number of reasons, but at one point I was talking with a financial advisor who wanted to bring on someone to do that financial psychology work, because he would have people come in, they had met their goal or whatever it was, and they would, look at the numbers and kind of, a little like, well, what's next? What should I do with this? And also then, well, my kid wants to start a business, and so I guess I'm going to give him this. And he was like, whoa, 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 this is all emotion. And this is not necessarily my realm of what to advise you, because I'm telling you, don't do this. Do this based on the numbers, but that's not how we make the decision.
Right. Final comments, questions before we? Jen, I thought it was awesome.
I, aw, well,
Well,
thank you.
yeah,
I
thanks
hope,
for
Yeah, thank you,
yeah,
Jen.
it's,
thanks for taking the time and putting that together. So I tell you what, we will end it. Let's take about a 5-minute break and then switch over to our other link, and we'll continue with the meeting. But really, thanks again. I mean, this is a topic near and dear to my heart, and I appreciate all your insight and expertise.
aw.
All right, see you on the other side.